Good evening. Welcome to our study tonight. As we go in the news, there's some exciting news coming out of Israel. This has happened, and I'll just give you a little overtune to this. Uncovering the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam was, I've been to Israel 50 times, and the Pool of Siloam, when I first started going, they would point to a little grassy field and say, that's where we think the Pool of Siloam is. Well, in the 90s, late 90s, they found the steps of the Pool of Siloam when they were excavating by a road on the bottom part of the city of David. Today, they're uncovering the entire one. So in this chart that you're seeing, those double steps going down, that's actually the perimeter of the pool. The pool is where the dirt is, right there on the steps. And they're now starting to uncover the entire structure. And it's open to the public. It's located just outside the walls of Jerusalem's old city to the southeast, where several pools were fed by the waters of the Gihon Spring. And it's carried there by a Siloam tunnel. The Gihon was one of the 4 rivers that flowed out of Eden in Genesis chapter 12. Millions of pilgrims coming from outside of Jerusalem would probably stop at this pool, and they would do a ritual bathing before they went up to the temple. This is the same pool that Jesus sent the blind man to go and wash in the Pool of Siloam, and as he went down the pilgrim road, he would wash and then get healed. So this pool is extremely significant. It's also mentioned in the Gospel of John, which I just told you, where Jesus heals the blind man. It's John chapter 9. So the exact location of the original pool as it existed during the time of Jesus remained a mystery until it was just recently discovered, the same route the Jewish pilgrims walked 2,000 years ago. Let's go a little bit further and give you a little bit about the economy. BRICS and prophecy. At the end of August, South Africa hosted a meeting of the BRICS nations. I told you this before. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's the acronym for it. Also present were several other nations, 6 of which will officially become part of the BRICS group in January of 2024. This is really noteworthy. We need to understand what's going on here. The ones that will join will be Argentina, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and that's the biggie, Egypt, and United Arab Emirates. Multiple dictatorships who oppose the United States and the West are lining up to join the BRICS group. The BRICS exists as a mechanism to break the hegemony that America and the West have exercised in the Middle East and much of the world. Since World War II, we've been the dominant nation, not just militarily, but also economically. Well, these nations now are starting to go against that. Why? Because one of the ways the group proposes to counter American influence is by allowing the nations to trade with each other using their own currencies instead of the US dollar. Some leaders have suggested that the group create its own currency to compete with the US dollar, possibly even backing the new currency with gold. And if they do that, and these nations have been stockpiling gold, if they do that, the currency in America, the fiat currency, will go straight downhill. Such moves are seen as a way to limit America's ability to impose economic sanctions. We impose sanctions on countries because we limit them in their ability to have dollar bills. Well, that would be then their dependency on the US dollar. That would be gone. Bible prophecy foretells the emergence of an end-time Arab superpower known as the Kings of the South, and another group known as the Kings of the East that could include Russia, India, and China. Daniel 11 tells us that. Could the developing BRIC structure provide an avenue for these nations to come together economically and then break out on their own? I believe it will. The world is in a great deal of flux right now, and the current conflagrations of nations are sure to change in the months and the years ahead. And by the way, if you're following economics, that is a really important article I just read to you, because it could change the whole structure of the US dollar worldwide. Speaking of the economy, more domestically at home, we've been telling you about this for quite a while. Real estate industry collapse could bring down the entire US economy. Higher interest rates are absolutely strangling the real estate industry, and there's no relief in sight. The sudden shift from a very low interest rate environment to a much higher interest rate environment has paralyzed sales of homes. Millions of potential home buyers have been chased out of the market because of the exceedingly high mortgage payments. Sales of previously owned homes have dropped by more than 32% over the past 2 years. In other words, about 1/3 of the entire previously owned home market has already been wiped out. So when home sales crash, everybody that works in the real estate industry suffers. We know that this happened in the real estate industry in panic mode. This is from the Wall Street Silver. Without transactions, many jobs that are commission-oriented are seeing huge declines in incomes. Real estate agents, mortgage brokers, title insurance, home inspectors, All of the various categories are entering a depression from lack of transactions. So it's a domino effect. 45%, what does that mean? That's how much investor purchases of homes have fallen since just last year. Home buying looks less profitable than during the pandemic housing boom. Investors, just like private buyers, think it's a very, very bad time to buy a home. Commercial real estate's also, their prices are plummeting all over the nation, and our banks have trillions of dollars of exposure. Banks are already pulling back. Debt origination fell by 52% for the second quarter year over year, according to Newmark. Leading volume among banks fell by 48%. So many of our financial institutions are going to be in very, very serious trouble because of this. And if the Federal Reserves were to push interest rates all the way to the floor immediately, obviously that would help if they brought them all down. But instead, the Fed officials continue to insist that rates are going to go even higher, and that's going to escalate the crisis further. The Fed has raised rates up to 5.5% in a matter of a couple months. You're going to hear a lot of people crying about this in the next few months because they can't borrow anything anymore and they can't run their businesses. Small and mid-sized businesses all over America are really struggling right now. Economic activity is slowing down all around us, and they're starting to lay off workers en masse. And President Biden is lying to you. Bidenomics is the most pathetic thing I've ever heard of. We are not in an economic boom. We are not in a recovery. We are in a downward slide. And I'm not really sure how he can even live with himself. He says so many lies. In fact, in just the past 2 months, the U.S. has lost a whopping 670,000 full-time jobs. When the official numbers that the government gives us start looking this bad, you know the hour is late. And the job cuts just keep on coming. On Wednesday, we learned that Roku will be cutting a third round of layoffs. They plan to lay off 300 more people, about 10% of its workforce. That's a third round of layoffs from Roku in recent months. They let go 400 employees between November and March. It's actually something that is not being told anywhere on our media. The United States has seen the biggest ever spike in homeless people living on the streets. I've told you this before. As preliminary figures show, a record 11% increase just this year. 600,000 rough sleepers across cities and towns in America. Places like Oakland and San Francisco and California have become hotbeds for the homelessness. This isn't supposed to be happening. The Biden administration told us over and over again that Bidenomics was working. Of course, the truth is that we now have entered the very early chapters of a full-blown economic nightmare. Things are going to get a whole lot worse for the real estate industry. Things are going to get a whole lot worse for the economy as a whole. Most Americans are going to get completely blindsided by what is coming. I don't like giving you the bad news, but I need to give you the news so you can prepare, because nobody is telling us this, and we need to hear it. We need to know what a precipice we're on, that our economy is really skating on thin ice, and everyone around us is lying to us. Our woke media is lying to us, our liberal media, the Biden administration is lying to us, officials are lying to us. But your grocery store bill isn't lying to you. Your gas bill isn't lying to you. Your heating your house and cooling it isn't lying to you. And so it's not going to get any better unless we change that administration. And we need to pray that we could do that. Let me give you a little bit about, about war. China is preparing for war. Chinese Communist Party, which is the CCP, and its leader, Xi Jinping, is rapidly militarizing his country and has instructed his army to, quote, prepare for war. That's what he has said to his army, and, quote, fight and win it. And he said that just a few weeks ago. Chinese ruler Xi Jinping replaced the senior leadership of China's rocket force, which is responsible for almost all of China's 400 or so nuclear warheads. It looks like Xi is contemplating using, or at least threatening to use, his most destructive weapons. In other words, China is planning to go to war. Xi is doubtlessly weighing the risk-reward ratio of launching an aggressive operation against Taiwan during U.S. President Joe Biden's term in office. He knows that he has a small window. Biden's not going to do anything. That window of opportunity is going to close in 18 months, and he knows it. So if I were to predict something, and I hope I am desperately wrong, if I were to predict something, look for China to make a move on Taiwan in the next 18 months, before the 18 months is over. The increasingly provocative posture of China's army towards Taiwan was mainly a consequence of the visits of Taiwan by prominent U.S. politicians. Listen, it's ridiculous. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan in August 2022. It infuriated Xi Jinping. There's no reason that a Speaker of the House should ever go to some nation like that. She did it just for political purposes. The CCP's rehearsals started right after that. They started rehearsing in the South China Sea and in the Strait of Taiwan, military operations. Military moves suggestive of the CCP's hostile intent towards Taiwan included recent deliveries of wheeled armored vehicles to China's coastal province of Guangdong, an area with several natural launch points for an invasion of Taiwan. In addition, China's rocket force in April of 2022 launched missiles that flew over Taiwan and landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone. Since January of this year, Chinese aircraft and naval vessels have habitually crossed the assumed median line between China and Taiwan in the Taiwanese Strait. Xi Jinping and former Minister Qin Gang both warned the United States about interfering in what China claims is an internal problem. China has also rolled out a campaign intimidation that shows China is calling the shots, berating the U.S. in Alaska, smuggling over the U.S. border fentanyl and other drugs that have killed an estimated 200,000 U.S. civilians, establishing at least 6 illegal police stations in the United States, sending a Chinese spy balloon over America's sensitive military and nuclear military sites before the Biden administration shot it down after it went across the country, hacking and spying, and repeatedly rejecting U.S. proposals to establish protocols of communication in a crisis between the United States and China. If China's economy continues to collapse, and it is collapsing, Xi Jinping could decide to incorporate Taiwan with military force. He'll then need to decide on the most appropriate time to launch an invasion of Taiwan. After witnessing the Biden administration's abandonment of Afghanistan, that would most likely be when Biden was still in power. Early October would offer good weather for an invasion also. A new group of possibly up to 5,000 men, many single and military age, have been brought into America over its southern border. Biden should be impeached. There's articles of impeachment. Actually, it's not an article of impeachment. It's an inquiry into impeachment that's just been filed by the House this week. He should be impeached for just making us so vulnerable to military attack, economic collapse, and not to mention his corrupt money dealings. The men, this 5,000 men have come over, even now, may be militarizing China's new U.S. farmland to sabotage U.S. electric grids, water supplies, power plants, civilian and military airports, communication centers, highways, tunnels, bridges, ports, and other strategic infrastructure. So what does Biden do? Tells us, and Mayorkas tells us that the border is secure. It is not secure. We are letting the enemy, not just immigrants, we're letting the enemy in to set up camp if he ever turns and decides in the near future to turn on the United States. Again, nothing that's really kind of warm and fuzzy tonight in the war front. But Jesus said there will be wars and rumors of wars. These are rumors of wars. They're rumors of World War III. This is what Jesus was talking about. This is a sign of the end. It's one of the reasons why I'm bringing it to tonight. Rumblings in Russia that nuclear war with the U.S. is now inevitable. It blows my mind to think that any country will want to explode a nuclear weapon. That is a point of no return. We've known that since the 1940s, 1945. It's a point of no return. Listen to this. Most Americans have absolutely no idea how close we are to nuclear war. Our politicians confidently assure us that the war in Ukraine will never spark a nuclear conflict. And the mainstream media in the Western world rarely talks about such a scenario. You'll never hear it on the news. But over in Russia, things are completely different. They regard the war in Ukraine as an existential conflict between Russia and NATO. And there's a constant talk on Russian television today, all week, all month, since February of last year, about the possibility of nuclear war. A Kremlin propagandist has issued a latest nuclear threat against the West regarding the war in Ukraine, warning that the U.S. could be in danger of a Russian missile attack. I'm quoting. His name is Igor Korotchenko. I told you about him last week. During his recent appearance on Russia Channel 1, Korotchenko openly talked about the first strike, which would involve their Russian military strike on America should we escalate the war against Russia and Ukraine. But Korochetsko's remarks are tame compared to what retired Major General Alexander Vladimirov is saying. Vladimirov is the author of Russia's War Bible, and he's entirely convinced that a nuclear war involving the United States and Russia has become, quote, inevitable. So why doesn't this make headlines and headline news all over the United States? Well, one of the reasons is because they're so fixated, our liberal media, on what Donald Trump is doing. And they weren't telling you how we're in dire consequences economically, socially on our border, and even foreign with Russia and China. According to Vladimirov, quote, nuclear weapons will be used in this war. And he wants his country to actively prepare for such an outcome so they'll have the best chance to survive, is what he says. The sooner our politicians and leadership realize this, the sooner we start to train troops and population for this. Instead of making our troops woke and heralding them for the right pronoun, we should be arming them. The more chances we have for survival, which means victory, will be when we arm our troops. If we stay on the path that we're on now, it's going to result in the unthinkable. That's why so many of us have been advocating for a peaceful solution in Ukraine. We should get out of the Ukraine. And I believe that with all my heart. We're not helping anyone. We're sending billions and billions of dollars, and we're prolonging another war, yet another war. Let me remind you, when Trump was in office, there were no wars. We were not involved in any war. And he was not about war. And Biden obviously is. Let me go a little bit further for you. Unfortunately, Joe Biden and his minions just keep escalating matters. They're pushing the Ukrainians to make more of an effort to achieve a breakthrough in the south. They urge Ukraine to push through the vast minefields left behind by Russia in the area, even if it means losing more soldiers and equipment in the process, according to the reports. But what are the Ukrainians supposed to do? The Russian defenses are extremely well prepared, and tens of thousands of Ukrainian men have already been slaughtered during their fruitless attempt to break through Russian lines. Meanwhile, the Russians have been making significant gains on the Eastern Front. The Ukrainians are running out of warm bodies. At some point, they're going to get very desperate. And desperate people do desperate things. At the same time, war with China just keeps getting closer and closer. This week, the Biden administration approved an $80 million military weapons package for Taiwan under a program typically saved for sovereign nations. The ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin told a regular news conference, Chinese military will take all necessary measures to resolutely counter this. Ever since Joe Biden entered the White House, his administration has been endlessly provoking both the Russians and the Chinese. And in the process, he has driven them both closer together. And now the Russians are actually proposing that North Korea should also be included in upcoming joint naval exercises. I always wonder where North Korea was going to fit into prophecy. Well, Russia and China and North Korea. North Korea is very close to China. When you talk kings of the East, if they're allies, Russia is also there. The eastern part of Russia is right near North Korea, right near China. So you talk kings of the East, it may not just be China. It may be that alliance of China, Russia, and North Korea. Just this past weekend, Russian ambassador to North Korea, Alexander Metsagora, told Russian media that, quote, it seems appropriate to include North Korea in joint military drills between Russia and China. What's happening, my friend? Well, the stage is being set for the hot phase of World War III. But most Americans are absolutely clueless. And our government has to be clueless, or else just ignoring it. Most Americans simply believe it when our experts and our news tells us that everything's going to be just fine. And for the moment, ignorance is bliss. But let me remind you, I've preached it over and over again, America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. Why is that? A question that I've explored many, many times. Let me go a little bit more with war. The Future Wars Prophecy. This is a new book out by Bill Solis. I encourage you to pick it up. In the last days, mankind will dwell in a war-torn world. Jesus tells us that. Conventional battles, nuclear exchanges, and supernatural demonic invasions are coming, according to the book of Revelation. So here's the Bible rundown of future wars yet to happen. Israel versus Iran and its proxies. The destruction of Damascus, Isaiah 17 tells us. The final Arab-Israeli war, Psalm 83. The Russian coalition invasion in Israel, Ezekiel 38. The two Christian killing crusades of the tribulation period. The demonic invasion that torments unsaved people, for 5 months. The 200 million demonic army that kills 1/3 of humankind. Again, all through the tribulation, those are. And the war in heaven between Michael, the archangel, and Satan, which is one that is started and is going to continue to go on as we get close to the tribulation and in the tribulation. Let me give you a little bit about religion. Association of Classical Christian Schools. If you want some good news, this is it tonight. Classical Christian schools see enrollment absolutely exploding all over the United States. And by the way, I went to a classical Christian school. I went to parochial school. I was taught a classical education, and most schools, all public schools, do not teach that. Only private ones, certain private ones. Since the beginning of 2020, when the COVID pandemic caused widespread and lengthy public school shutdowns and vaccine requirements, a growing number of parents are removing their students from public schools and enrolling them in private ones. Great for you. It's what you need to do. Among the private schools that have seen substantial growth are classical Christian schools, which focus on instilling students with a biblical worldview with the wisdom and traditions of Western civilization that have been established for centuries. With 1.2 million students leaving public schools since 2020, many are enrolling in private schools, which have seen enrollment increase by 140,000 students since 2020. As a result, classical Christian schools have seen enrollment mushroom over the last 3 years. Classical education is rooted in the founding of Western civilization and of America. It was a form of education developed in the church after the fall of the Roman Empire. It sustained the church as a primary form of education up to about 1830. It developed most of our founding fathers. It studies what are sometimes called the great books. It looks to the wisdom of the past. It studies a lot of theology. The students learn Latin and Greek, which is what I learned when I was just a small child in that Catholic school, as avenues to the past to be able to read original manuscripts. They all have in common a love for the Lord of Jesus Christ and the establishment of the Christian worldview. In the Bible, it's called paideia. It's the Greek word. We now call it worldview. That's the primary function of a classical Christian school. Not just to teach them things about culture, especially our modern culture, but to teach them a classical worldview and a Christian worldview. Since 2020, we have brought in almost 200 new Christian schools, classical schools. In this culture movement where things are so challenging, so many evil things are going on in public places, it's time for us as Christians to come back to the kingdom, to come back to Christ, to dedicate all of the universe and all of the world to His service and to His glory. I'm excited that that's happening. Great news. Let me give you a little bit more. Unfortunately, this isn't that great. Why is Generation Z abandoning marriage and children? A recent survey indicated that only a stunning 55% of Generation Z and millennials plan to have children, with a quarter of those between 18 and 34 ruling out parenthood entirely. The most common reason cited for this is wanting time for themselves. It's called selfishness. We're now living in an era of extended adolescence, brought about in part by the rising cost of both living and higher education, which brings a constant delay in adult activities like going on a date, working for pay, or learning to drive. There's other reasons also. Modern culture also continually facilitates and encourages this extended adolescence. In our materialistic and individually centered age, the pursuit of personal desires and self-discovery is often valued above everything else, with traditional bonds seen as constraints and things that hold people back. Corporations, educational institutions, popular culture reinforce this cultural shift, capitalizing on our prolonged adolescence. Take, for instance, the rise of therapy culture and a rapidly expanding trillion-dollar wellness market, which constantly encourages us to spend more money on ourselves, prioritize me time, and cater to our inner child. That's all baloney, by the way. Our infantilization is indulged and commodified across various industries, from universities providing students with coloring books. I'm not making this up. Bubbles, this is universities, and Play-Doh, to the booming market for childlike activities and products such as kidult toys and adult Happy Meals. Delaying adulthood comes with real costs. Women are discovering that when they wait too long to have children, they may lose the opportunity entirely, like Jennifer Aniston did, for example. We have more me time than any other point in human history, but it has come with record levels of mental health problems and a deepening sense of nihilism and disillusionment. Studies indicate that sacrificing for others brings real fulfillment. As people stumble through their teens, their 20s and 30s, with many of the rites of passage and signature experiences of previous generations lacking, will the lost boys and girls experience deep regret in middle age? Well, the answer is clearly yes. It isn't just that men are opting out of marriage and traditionally masculine activities, it's that those activities are being replaced. The rates of porn addiction among young men are approaching critical mass, deforming sexual desires, thus making women understandably less interested, creating record rates of erectile dysfunction, and wiring men's libidos to screens. Two of the traditional primary drivers of masculine ambition were the desire for sex, thus the need to engage in dating, courtship, resulting in marriage, and professional accomplishment. One is undermined and replaced by porn. The other is being replaced by video games, which deliver the sense of accomplishment, even militarily, while making the male playing the game, if anything, less attractive, less useful, and less intelligent, insofar as the hours wasted could have been used for actual accomplishment. For young men, gaming is up more than 50% since 2019. And guess what's down the most among young men? Sports, exercise, and working. I know that generational comparisons can be taken too far, but I always think of my father and my grandfather in this context. Hard workers, fathers of large families, and the idea that men could while away endless hours playing games would have disgusted them. And I know I'm not making a whole lot of people happy today, but what a waste of time. In short, although all the available research indicates that marriage and family brings the highest rates of happiness and fulfillment in life, married people are 30 points happier than unmarried people. It's also true that many Generation Zers have personally experienced, haven't personally experienced true happiness. Their suicide rates are up. What the internet is doing to our brains details this. Internet has reshaped the upcoming generations. The rise of social media and the selfie means that at any given moment, millions of young people are staring at their own faces on screens. And again, I know it's not popular, but I have to tell you it. And the skyrocketing rates of mental health problems indicates that most of them don't care for what they see. Certain ways of living are being lost. To most young people today, having 2 kids seems overwhelming. 4 is an enormous family. More than that is simply unfathomable. My mother's mother had 10. My father's mother had 11. Most of them didn't see marriages that lasted a half a century or more and produced lots of children. In short, most of them never seen up close a large family, and believe that having one is not just undesirable, but genuinely impossible. One of the primary social cures for many of the ills facing our society is once again to emphasize the necessity of monogamous, faithful, fruitful, and lifelong marriages. The data is clear. Marriage makes people happy. Promiscuity breaks hearts and brings heartbreak. Let me give you one more tonight. Well, actually I have 2 more. There's something else happening in the sky. The Bible says in Genesis that the stars are for sign seasons and times. In 2017, many of you know, I did a documentary in Hollywood based on the great sign in the sky with Virgo. There's something else happening in Virgo on the 18th of September. It's an asteroid child. Now just listen to this, it's kind of strange. Revelation chapter 12 describes that great sign in the heavens, which happened, by the way, first time in 7,000 years, in September of 2017. Again, that's what that, if you can go to YouTube, it's still there. It's called The Sign. A great documentary that was done. What the Bible says is a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. That happened in 2017. People are confusing it with what's coming on now. It's a little bit different. Back then, she was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, and the dragon stood in front of her. The woman who was about to give birth, so might devour her child the moment he was born. Of course, it's an indication, a prophecy of Christ, of Virgo being Mary, Jesus being the child, the great dragon being Satan, trying to kill him at his birth. So there's a lot of prophecy, there's a lot of history, a lot of biblical history there. But in mid-September of this year, the constellation that depicts the woman, Virgo, will be clothed with the sun again, the moon will be under her feet. There won't be 12 stars around her head. That happened in 2017. But Simultaneously, an asteroid named the Child will be exiting the belly of Virgo. It's a picture of birth. Now, what does it mean? Well, let's go on a little further. So what we see is people are confusing this with September of 2017. It's not the same sign. It's another sign. As the asteroid Child, that's what it's named, is being born in mid-September, a newly discovered comet named after its discoverer, Hideo Nishimura, will also be passing through Virgo. The name Hideo Nishimura has a prophetic connotation. First, the name Hideo means excellent man, hero, or husbandman. This is significant because Jesus is referred to as the good man, the mighty man, or the husband who will be returning on an appointed day. Just think of the things in the signs. Exactly 9 months prior to September birth of asteroid Child from Virgo, in last December 2022, an asteroid named 3241 Yeshua, akin to Jesus' Hebrew name, Yeshua, passed through the reproductive area of Virgo, denoting of a divine conception. Asteroid Child was discovered in 1989 by American astronomer Jack B. Child. Jack Child's initials are JC, a moniker for Jesus Christ. But the most compelling aspect of this coincidence is that simple fact that a man with the last name of Child happens to discover an asteroid that exits Virgo's belly during Revelation 12 alignment, thus fulfilling the child component of the sign. So it's the conclusion. Mid-September 2023, we'll see a one-of-a-kind convergence in the heavens. Virgo will be clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet. An asteroid named Child will be exiting the belly of Virgo. The red planet will be hovering around the belly of Virgo. Red planet denoting the great red dragon. A newly discovered comet will be passing through Virgo for the only foreseeable time. The million-dollar question here is the sign telling us that the end is near, or is it telling us that the end is here? Whichever the case, the implications are astronomical. Let me give you one last one. And I know a lot of you are going to write to me for that. Feel free to do that. Are we seeing the end times peace accord with many beginning to take shape? One of the most important international agreements in modern history is being secretly negotiated behind the scenes. And once it's publicly announced, it could fundamentally change the geography of the Middle East. As part of a blockbuster deal to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, the Saudis want to achieve some sort of diplomatic breakthrough for the Palestinians. That won't be an independent Palestinian state because Benjamin Netanyahu would never accept such an outcome. But the Saudis have floated another plan that might be acceptable to Netanyahu's government, and it will result in a historic division of the Holy Land. The United States is the mediator, I wish we weren't, for these negotiations, and it's being reported that the Biden administration wants to get an agreement finalized before the end of the first quarter of next year. Joe Biden is quite concerned about his legacy, and he should be. And he knows that there's no guarantee that he'll win in 2024, God forbid. According to Axios, the Biden administration has made it abundantly clear to the Israelis there will be no agreement at all unless they're willing to make significant concessions to the Palestinians, I'm quoting. So what would significant concessions look like? Well, I have my own ideas, but let me tell you with some of this. We know that there will be no independent Palestinian state while Netanyahu is in charge. He said it many times. But with Netanyahu support merging the Palestinians into the nation of Jordan. Supposedly, this is the plan that's favored by the Saudis to put the Palestinians in the Jordanian state. According to insiders, this new entity would include present-day Jordan, Gaza, and the West Bank. The West Bank is actually bordering to Jordan. Some seem to think that Israel would agree to this if the Palestinians were to relinquish all claims to the city of Jerusalem. Now, that brings up some interesting prophecy. The framework has also been discussed by the Israelis in recent months. As suggested elsewhere, Jordan will change its name to reflect this territorial union. The name Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine has lately been suggested in an article published in the Saudi royal family-owned news outlet Al Arabiya News last June 8th. And an internationally recognized border between Israel and the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine will be established to recognize the new reality. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen. During the course of negotiations, many things can change. So we have to wait and see the final results of the negotiations. An international aid program, similar to the Marshall Plan for Europe after World War II, would be established as part of the solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict, to develop the economy of Jordan and integrate the Palestinians in the expanded Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine. We do know that the Palestinians and Jordanians have already been developing much closer ties. Just last week, Palestinian authorities were supposed to talk with both Saudi officials and U.S. officials. All the parties can agree to a deal. If all of them can agree to a deal, they'll announce it during the first half of 2024. Keep your ears open. The Saudi plan to divide the Holy Land may be part of the final deal, or it may end up at the cutting room floor. But if this normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel does divide up the Holy Land, that's going to have enormous implication for all of us. So how could this relate to Bible prophecy? Well, let me give you my scenario. When it remains to see what the current peace talks go, one of the most important events to understand is the end time scenario detailed scripture found in the book of Daniel, chapter 9. The timeline of events of that given as a peace accord is confirmed or guaranteed between Israel and other nations for 7 years. 7. Daniel 70 weeks. The signing of such a peace accord begins a 7-year period to what is commonly referred to by prophecy students as the tribulation period. Now, here's what I see. My opinion. The West Bank is here. This is the Mediterranean Sea. The West Bank is here. The Jordan River. This is the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The West Bank is Palestinian. It includes Jerusalem. In this agreement, if the Palestinians agree not to have any type of say in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is a divided city, and they become part of the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine, that would unite them. They would have a better economy. And if they gave up the Temple Mount, which is what they're talking about, then the Dome of the Rock would be moved. And then you'd have, I get chills, because then you'd have a clear path to put the third temple in. And all they have to do is ask Israel, or demand that Israel lay down its nuclear weapons. And then you have the start of something that could be the 7-year tribulation. And of course we know that the rapture of the church, I believe, will happen right before that. But to know that the talks are there, we are extremely close. All right. I guess that's good news to end with, and I think it is.